Oh, I was having a little technical difficulty, but I think we're here live. And hello, everyone, for joining me today. And welcome to another episode of Live with Sondra. I'm your host, Sondra Shannon, CEO of Gatemaster Technology. And for those of you who don't know, Gatemaster provides ticketing solutions for the attraction industry. And we're all about making things easier for both operators and guests. And I'm super excited about today's show because we're diving into something incredibly important, and it's workplace culture and employee retention. Joining me is Anthony Poponi, the CEO and founder of Focus on the 40. Anthony is an expert in positive psychology and creating happier, more successful workplaces. He specializes in showing audiences a more joyful path to fulfillment and success in their workplace. He's also a speaker, author of the Little Book of Workplace Happiness, and an all around champion for positive workplace environments. And with over 3 billion transactions processed at attractions under my leadership at Gatemaster, I understand the critical role and the importance of happy, engaged teams play in delivering the best exceptional guest experience. So I believe that Anthony's expertise will provide invaluable insights for attraction owners, operators, and leaders alike. So today we're going to be discussing boosting retention and work culture without breaking the budget. And before we begin, I just want to get the audience thinking today. I want to get you thinking about a question that I have for you. I want you to post your comments in the comment section or questions that you have. If you'd like to post those questions there in the comment section, we have our show producer watching those for us today. But here's the question that I have for you. What is one thing that you believe makes the biggest difference in employee morale at your organization? We want to hear from you. So without further ado, let's welcome Anthony to the stage. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So before we get started, because I have a lot of questions for you, this is a really, really not only a hot topic, it's a great topic, one that I wholeheartedly believe in and support. I love the idea of boosting retention and culture through happier workplaces. And I mentioned to you earlier today in our conversation before the show, my middle name is Joy. So anything that brings joy is something that is near and dear to me as it pertains to workplace environments. I just want to make sure, though, that I did not miss anything in your bio. Is there anything that you want to tell the audience or anything more that we can add to who you are? I'm sure you're very many things, but just your experience and maybe even what led you to do what you do.
Yeah, I'm kind of jealous that your middle name is Joy. If I had to pick a middle name for me, it's probably Goofball, but it's not really a professional relationship. No, I think you covered it really well. I'm excited to talk about this because I think where we are in society today, and this is not something that's necessarily new, like in the last few years, but it's a decades-long trend of declining overall social connection and happiness and engagement. And work is an incredible opportunity for that. We have choices in front of us where we choose to work, what we choose to do for work, who we choose to do it with, and how to get the most out of that is actually, I think, a really rich opportunity to get more out of life than just having a job where you're mailing it in, and not fulfilled by that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think I might mess this up, but one of the parks that I worked for probably one of my very first parks, and I worked for Ed Hart, who's who's a theme park legend. He's purchased several parks over the many years. I've been in this industry for over 20 years, 25 years, and I worked for this guy Ed Hart, and I remember one time he said to me, he said something along the lines of, we don't need to work, or we don't need to work to live. It was something along the lines of, we don't need to work to live, but we need to live, or we don't need to live to work, we need to work to live, right? And it always struck me because that's what kind of pushed me towards this path. And I'm sorry, I'm a dyslexic, so I had to work that out in my head. But that always sat with me because over the years, one of the things that I've tried to do for myself personally, and one of the things that I hope to do for not only this audience and maybe the people that they are leading, but also for the people that I lead, is just like you said, we all have to do work, right? That's not going to go away. I mean, some of us will be fortunate and privileged enough to maybe not have to have that in our lives. But at the same time, like I feel like my work is so much of a passion and a way to have impact on the world. So I hope that I don't ever have to stop working, but I want it to be this thing that you're talking about.
Sure. I don't think that quote, it creates sort of a duality. It's like a either or situation, and I don't think it has to be either or. I think what you spoke to is like, what's a definition that I can have over my what do I bring to the work, and what does my work bring to the world, and what do I gain from my work other than financial compensation? Do I get really great relationships? Do I build skills? Do I find my way of contributing to a group of people? Do you have joy at your work? Like, do you experience like fun moments of laughter? Great. Where can these things, where do they intertwine? And, I'm really attached to my work because my work is an extension of who I am and who I want to be and my values. And hopefully people can find that in their work as well.
Yeah, that's interesting because we talk a lot about in work about mission, vision, and values, and you're exactly right. The work that you do, if it reflects those things, maybe it doesn't have to feel so much like work, right?
Yeah,
Because it is aligning you with maybe purpose and impact. So I'd like to talk today about the role of workplace culture, if that's okay.
sure.
And, what your thoughts are on how what does workplace happiness really mean and why does it matter?
Yeah, I think the first part is an important distinction to make. And so the expertise that I have, if I have any, is in positive psychology, which is the scientific study of human happiness. And it's been around as a discipline for at least since the 90s as a term. And it existed before that with people like Abraham Maslow. And then go all the way back to Greek philosophers that talked about, what happiness was as they were trying to break it down. And now it's turned into a clinical science that has the same level of um, of discipline, of research, of structure, of strategy, of really trying to understand it scientifically. And I think what's really valuable for that is like the things that come forward out of that maybe were empirically known by the ancients and now validated by science. And even that word happiness is something that requires, some that distinction is the word I used before, and I'll stick with that now to say happiness by itself can mislead us, right? Are you happy right now? Well, I don't. Am I happy? Am I laughing? Am I giggling? Am I, is there somebody telling jokes? Well, that's an element of happiness. That's a side of happiness. The Greeks called that hedonia, hedonism, right? And then there's the second side that is virtuous living, that is eudaimonia, that is values and purpose. And so, how do we create a different definition that brings together both of those? Can we use the word content or life satisfaction, or terms that get used, fulfillment? Like, are you fulfilled in your life? Do you have aspects of pride and pleasure and purpose? And what's that mix all look like together? And so I think that gives a more rich understanding of, like, if we take that now and say, okay, what is workplace happiness? Well, it can be all those things. It can be these feelings of joy and elation, deep feelings of trust, satisfaction in what we do. It also honors the fact that there's like what I call hard parts to happiness as well. And we see those hard parts at work, with like meeting where your talent threshold stops and where you have to now learn new skills and try new things and make mistakes and fail. Navigating relationships, the most beautiful thing about life on this planet can be the quality and the richness of the relationships you have. The most challenging thing on this planet can be navigating relationships in your life, and how hard those can be and how we're wired for those. And so I think it does matter because, if you dive into the science, we understand that a significant portion of our happiness comes from external factors or things that, outside of our control. But a big part of our happiness is within our control and within our choice. And one of the big choices we make is where we live, where we work, and who we spend our time with in those places. And work is a big part of that. And so, how can that be something that really adds richness, to this life, that adds depth to our lives? And I think we see that a lot. I do a lot of professional speaking, and At times, I get to go to these conferences and trade shows and different events, and I love the award ceremonies. And in most cases of those award ceremonies, it's people reflecting about what they did over time and who they did it with and how much they overcame together. And I think that that's all available to us if we seek it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you said one of your favorite parts is the celebration, right? That people are having when you're at these events. One of my mentors said to me one time, he said, the only emotion that belongs in business is celebration.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that one so much because, we look at like burnout, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
I read some articles, and there was a gentleman's book that I read, and I wish I could give him credit and think of his name right now. Maybe we'll have to post that in the comments. But he said that what they found burnout in the workplace often is the lack of excitement,
Mm-hmm.
right? When they really get to the bottom of what burnout looks like for people. So it's interesting to me that you mentioned the celebration part, and the hard parts, right? Because sometimes we forget that the newness of learning a new skill or failing or
Mm-hmm.
having to do those hard things can also be exciting, right? It could be a super exciting part about it if we're in an environment where we can thrive and have joy and happiness in that process of doing all those things. And so, my next question would be, how does positive workplace culture directly impact retention and performance?
I think certainly tie right back in with that word excitement. It's not really a word that I think a lot about when that comes up a lot and when you think about workplace culture, but engagement is the term. Excitability is probably woven into that somehow, and I think some of that is in a very broad scale is how do you get your people engaged and seeing how they can contribute, and that's one of the big five facets of positive psychology of human happiness overall. It talks about giving people a chance to see their unique contribution. What is it that you do that's different from what other people do, both in the skill that you do, the thing you deliver every day, and how you do that, how you bring yourself forward in that, and how that rolls up to the larger picture of how we do things as an organization overall, and how we have success, how we have good guest experiences, and how that turns into profitability and good things that come out of that.
Sure.
So certainly that's one of those things, and the inverse, and what plays really deeply into that is having a high trust culture, and high trust culture allows you to say, I can say that you are good at what you're doing, and it doesn't take away from me, right? I can have that's a moment of vulnerability. Um, I can show you, I can recognize excellence in the moment. I think award ceremonies are a great thing to do. But if you only do an award ceremony once a year and you only honor 8 people, well, that's only 8 people, and there's 364 days left in the year. Recognition should be happening all the time at all levels, and multiple facets and multiple forms. The human brain likes that feedback. That's actually something that's really valuable for us. And trust really gets us there. And trust has so many different aspects to it and dynamics to it. But saying like I want to show you how I think you can be great and what you can really contribute to this organization, and how that can change in a lot of ways. Um, Trust is that foundation for sure, and of course the inverse is like not trusting people and having toxicity. And I think most of us understand, like we've been in those workplaces where we don't trust the people that we work with. And trust has multiple parts to it, but if you don't trust people and you have this toxic workplace, that's the inverse of retention too. That's going to chase people away more than it brings people in. And if you're
Right.
bringing in 2 new people and you're losing one person, your net gain on employees is not where you need it to be, right? So it's that positivity, I think, though, is unique, and it's also something that is I would say that the exceptional teams do this well, that they can have conflict and they can have very direct conversations. They can have robust conversations, but because of the foundation of trust, they can do that. They can have these moments where and they can step in and they can start seeing that they can achieve different things together by really leaning into this foundation of trust that allows for building up of the people that creates that engagement, that creates that it's this really lovely. I was doing a cycle, but I think it's more of a spiral, where things just spiral upward.
Yeah, I love that. And you know what I think is interesting? You mentioned too vulnerability, right? Creating a space where people can be vulnerable because that means a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
Even on my team, oftentimes, especially if you work directly with me, I don't. Everybody on the team doesn't report to me, but those that report to me, we have like code words for when that space is needed, right?
Yeah.
It's something that I had to create for my team simply because, I'm getting pulled in a lot of directions. I've got a lot of businesses I run between my husband and I. I've got this team, I've got this show, I've got all these things. And sometimes I just need somebody to cue me in that maybe the space for them to be vulnerable is there, or that they need me to do that, or maybe they've got to tell me something, right? Because I'm a big believer that a friend tells you when you got a booger in your nose, but we're not always open to receiving that. I saw that one of your favorite things was humor, so I figured I better throw
Yeah,
out.
yeah, absolutely.
But you know what I mean? Like, sometimes that's what a good friend would do for you. And
Sure.
I hope that from my team. And sometimes though they've got to put me in a space to be able to accept that feedback
Yeah.
and responsibility. And I think that's interesting because that actually kind of leads me to my next question, which is, what what are the misconceptions about happiness at work and what is it not, right? Like what when we're talking about this, what is it? What can maybe people interpret this differently as than what you're trying to say to us today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go back to this. The biggest, broadest umbrella for this would be calling it fulfillment. And just saying that work is going to have all these different aspects to it. And that fulfillment piece brings in the stuff that makes you feel good in the moment and the stuff that feels good in retrospect. So pushing through boundaries, growing as a person, realizing that you've hit your threshold. I don't know how to do this. That's vulnerability. I don't know how to do this. Can you show me how? I don't know how to do this. I'm going to figure it out. Fine. Those are all vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think just allowing for this flip side of the coin of happiness is part of it. That also allows for you to understand that stress is a normal thing, and stress is a message from your brain when your brain perceives that something around you is not good for your survival, right? Now, our brains have really old wiring, like Windows 98 kind of stuff. Um, and so understanding the messages behind stress is really helpful. Now, stress comes in lots of different forms: competing deadlines, uh, struggling relationships, outsized expectations from clients, whatever the thing is, right? Um, but there's good stress and there's bad stress. And the bad type of stress is the sorts of stresses that hopefully we can address in our workplaces, right? Toxic relationships between people, um, and even conflict. There's good conflict and there's bad conflict. And I say this with a group. I'll be like, "How do you guys do with trust?" And we'll talk through that a little while. And I have all sorts of assessment tools to help us break down what trust means and give people language around the word trust so that they can see it and experience it, and feel it, recognize when it's been broken, recognize when it's being built. And then I say, "Well, how are you guys doing with conflict?" And they're like, "Oh, we're real good at conflict." And I'm like, "That's not what I mean. Like, that's the wrong kind of conflict. There's a different type of conflict that moves things forward, that isn't artificial harmony, that isn't faking like we all get along and then talking in the parking lot about what's really going on. It's having the comfort and the safety, the vulnerability, the psychological safety, and even the space for leaders to say, I need to know what's not going right, because that's how we fix things. That's how we get to be exceptional at what we do. And that's required. And it's really hard, because I don't think a lot of us come with, you alluded to it before, being like, I need you to tell me when I need to hear the things I need to hear. I don't sweep them under the carpet, and because that's not actually helpful to the growth, of the organization. And that provides kind of this understanding of like, no, this is kind of how we behave, because we have to behave this way to get where we want to go. And then there's also, I think, a whole other part of this. Like, for me, I've already told you that, like, there's a difference for people, and I think you need to understand this for them. Is this a job for you? Is this a career for you? Or is this your calling? And calling doesn't mean necessarily something religious or even spiritual, but like, this is the thing I was called forth to do. This is a great opportunity for me to do the things that I'm great at on this planet. Right. Is it a career? Is it something that you want to go up? I've seen something in the chat about like, hey, give me a clear career pathway. Show me where I can go with this so I can understand why I'm learning what I'm learning now and how that will serve me and growing in the future. Awesome. The number one reasons, one of the top reasons people leave their job, it's about money sometimes. But if it's a really good job with really good people and a clear path forward for them, even if it doesn't mean a new title, even if it just means continuing to get to grow and learn and develop, that's huge. And showing people where they can go with that will keep them around. That's retention. And it may be high performers may leave you. You might keep them for 3 years instead of 2 years because they're so upwardly mobile and they're so attractive to other employers. But at least they stay with you until they find the perfect thing. And if you develop them and then they go off and do something else, then they can come back, and they want to come back because they're like, I learned so much in that role. I moved to a different company because of the opportunity that was there. But I've always thought about coming back to this organization because of what I experienced there. And I know I'll continue to grow and I'll keep wanting to work with these people. So I think that distinction is really important though, because some people it's a calling, some people it's a career. And for some, it's a job. Like some of them, they want to come in, they want to do a good job at their work, and then they want to go home because they have 2-year-olds at home. And they also want to leave on time every day because they want to coach their kids' team, or they're involved in PTA, or they're big in volunteering with the local art community, and they love that part of their life away from work, or they have aging parents that need their care. And if you can get to know that person, and the analogy I say is like, who's the person behind the name tag? Who's the person behind the title? That's something that I think we have this, like, we put a misconception of like this barrier up of like people at the top are perfect robots, like they don't have emotions, they never make mistakes, and they're not human beings like us. And I think all of that kind of takes away from these opportunities for that depth of relationships that I think is just so important.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you talk about the depth of relationships, and also like when you look at the people at the top.
Yeah.
What I've come to realize, probably speaking on stages like you, alongside some very big leaders in the tech space, and realizing that they are human as well, but maybe don't have these tools that you're talking about that allows them to not only humanize their team, but humanize themselves. So I find as a leader, sometimes you do get a lot of people saying yes, or it's
Yeah.
all good. And,
Yeah.
and there are days like on my show days, I'm like, I have a rule, no bad news. That is a real thing, but
I
everybody's
like it.
spot in on that because they
Yeah.
want me to do a good job too, right?
Sure.
So I get the bad news after the show's done.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, I think what's interesting when you talk about relationships, how important it is. I think that's something that really fueled me personally was, like you said, we've all had these experiences where we've had leadership or bosses that didn't treat us quite right. And maybe it was because there wasn't a connection, or maybe we just didn't get along, whatever that is. Or maybe they just didn't have the tools.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's probably more often than not. I think in most cases, we want to meet our KPIs. We want to meet all these things that our businesses demand of us. But how do we do that while still giving people their dignity and space? And, what I think is interesting is I got invited to a safety conference, which is kind of outside the scope of what I do in my industry, but I'm always curious to learn about things. And I got invited, a friend of mine took me along with them. And when they were looking at a lot of the safety statistics, and these spanned across hospitals, airlines, and we got a lot of airline conversation happening right now. But one of the things that they found is the number one reason a lot of these problems happen is because people don't feel like they can speak up.
Mm.
That can't feel good in the workplace, right? That blew my mind when you realize that a lot of things that are happening that are problematic for these industries that impact safety, the team didn't feel like they could say, hey, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? They often knew about it before it happened. And I think what's interesting about what you're teaching us today, and I'm hoping that you can share some strategies with the businesses that are listening that it can improve workplace culture, because I don't believe that this is a big cost thing. I think this is a low cost solution to creating a better environment and culture for your people. So, what would some of those strategies be?
Yeah, and if you want to talk about being engaged, like, just to kind of like finish the thought that you were playing with, and creating this psychological safety to say what needs to be said, right? That's engagement as well. Like, if
Right.
nobody listens to me, I'm never heard. My opinion is not requested, heard, valued, respected. That's huge, right? Having people understand where they're at. Now, there is a comma that goes with that, giving people space to share what they need to share with you, comma, and sometimes you're wrong, and that's okay. Like, just because you see a pattern and you see how things can be done differently doesn't mean line staff would can see the global picture of what's going on and why decisions are handed down. Now, having that communication is really important. High trust cultures are big on transparency. They're really big on showing people the why of way up here and trying to break that down in a way that you can understand that from whatever role you play within your industry. And I think that's really important, and that turns into retention. And and understanding how people fit in is recognition, and recognition is free. I mean, recognizing someone and giving them a brand new car once a year, fine. That's not what we're talking about. Recognizing people when you see them do something really great in front of you is good modeling for everyone else that's watching. It sets that expectation that we recognize excellence, we celebrate excellence, we want excellence, and then it gets everybody thinking about those standards and achieving at those standards. That that's free. I mean, just and you have to do it well, And if all you can do, and you said before, of like, well, we don't necessarily behave that way. Well, why not? It's not how we've ever done things. All right, fine. That's an excuse that only carries weight for a while. But if all you can do initially to recognize excellence is say, hey, good job, high five. All right, that's something. You at least recognize what you saw there. And there's strategies and techniques that go deeper than that show how someone did it with unique to them, specific to what was going on, doing it immediately after it happens. Those create these feedback loops that really help buoy people and that really make them feel like they contribute to this bigger overall organizational structure. And the other part that I keep talking to, and I'll keep probably talking about it, is the quality of relationships at work. And there's something silly about a box of donuts, about getting people together over coffee and water and all that stuff. Those things really matter. Human connection at the micro moments, especially when sharing food, especially sugary, salty, or fat laden foods, because they're really scarce to the human brain back in the way old days, and they trigger a lot of positive chemicals. And when we can do that, when we break bread with people around us, it's important that breaking bread, compagnon, right? Com with pagnon, company, right? Who are we with? Company comes from that, right? People we break bread with, those things are really important to the human brain. And creating those little tiny moments of touch, create connections, get to see people without their name tags on, um, and build those relationships. And the problem with the human brain is that this concept of trust, we want to create these cultures that really like that jive with each other. They take time. The human brain it's a slow cooker. It's a crock pot process of building trust and relationships. And we're a microwave society. We want everything right now. It takes a while. The adage that I really love on trust that someone shared with me is, we build relationships, we build trust in little tiny drops, and then we spill it in buckets. And so you have to pay careful attention to building those up over time. And some of that means having these vulnerable conversations about how do we get it's the question of a clear career pathway. How do we show you where you are, what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you need to grow into, what you need to develop, what are naturally inherent talents in you, what are your values and skills, what are things you want to learn, and then how do we craft a job over time, our career pathway for you that will align with that. And you're like, man, I am just constantly growing, learning, expanding in this thing. I would never want to leave this company. I have
Yeah.
so many opportunities in front of me.
Well, I think it's really important to have those relationships, like you said, and one thing that I found, and I've been CEO of this company for 12 years, so there's been a lot of mistakes and a lot of really great things that happen. And one of the really great things that has happened over the years, because I'm the first to say, like, I am not perfect. And even like with where we're going with the company, we have a lot of transparency on what that looks like. And I often tell my team, like, I've never been here before. Like, we're doing this together, right? Like, granted, I try to align myself and have mentors that have done these
Yeah.
things. So belief is high, and I've got people to rely on to help me guide me through these new things that might happen as we move to the next place and the next level. But one thing that has been really helpful for me is we sit with our team every year and we do kind of a 1, 3, and 5 year goal planning.
Yeah, great.
And a lot of that is training too, right? Like, because if we're gonna hit a certain KPI, we got to understand how to get there. So we teach them a framework on how they can plan for their goals. But what more so than what the business gained from it, and that just kind of came out of it, was that I wanted to understand, who are these people?
Mhm.
Where do they
Yep.
want to go? Because in order to give somebody a clear career pathway, you got to know where they want to go.
Yep.
And so getting to know them was super important. Getting to know their goals is super important because it gave me incredible insights into who these people are. It made me care about them even more. It drives my own passion for this business to make sure that they are successful, because I do believe that a leader's job is to ensure that everyone around them is successful. And we don't see that. This is why people like you exist, because we have to teach businesses this.
Yep.
This is why I have this show, because I think people like you need to have the space to speak this and show them that there are ways of doing this, and also things that people can learn and the science behind it. You've shared some very interesting things about what that looks like, and so, I want to talk a little bit about humor, because humor is something that I saw in your bio that is something super important to you. And I do think that's a really nice thing to have around. People always ask my husband, like, how did you get her? I'm like, he's funny, right? People like to be around people who are funny and make them feel good, and keep you laughing. And you got to keep, it's a nice way to keep people engaged, especially sometimes when things get hard, right?
Sure.
It can
Yeah.
be inspiring.
It can be what? Inspire?
I think humor can be super inspiring
Oh
too
yeah, absolutely.
when people are down.
Yeah, and it's when we talk about emotions, humor, laughter, responding to that. It's so much more than just the laughter that happens. Now, certainly behind laughter is these feelings triggered by endorphin, right? These moments of, like, these little tiny bits of positivity. Our emotions, they metabolize, like they literally are chemically induced, and they go away, and they're meant to go away. Our brain is saying, go do this next thing that's good for you. And when you do it, I'm going to make you feel good. Oh, you're eating food that's good for you. I'm going to make you feel good for doing that, right? I'm taking away a pain point at the same time. Humor is one of those things, though. It's beautifully complex. It can trigger these positive emotions in moments of high stress. A leader that can say the thing that, like, honors how stressful that thing is, and, like, okay, everybody alive? We're all alive. Okay, cool. Like, we got this, it's incredibly valuable. Now, not everyone is meant to be a stand-up comedian. Please. I've seen plenty of them that should not be. It is not ever going to be the thing they do well. That's okay. And there's really good work out there on what different styles of humor look like, what people's appetite for humor are, how they can contribute to the humor. Can some people do it? Sure, great. Some people can't, and that's okay. But can you foster an openness, a willingness, a culture that allows for that? Now, it needs to be culturally appropriate, corporately appropriate. There's plenty of boundaries that you have to be really cautious about with humor. But it creates those high stress moments where somebody says the thing and everybody laughs and releases. You've just created bonding out of that moment. There's oxytocin that flows from that moment of humor. It's a sign of leadership as well. Like having someone have the ability to say, I know this all feels really stressful, but I'm comfortable enough to say we're going to get through this, and I can show you that. I can demonstrate that through my humor. So you get all these different elements that come from it, and how we can use that as a tool is something that we need to understand about ourselves. Like we've talked about this a little bit of like, how do we craft your job around what you're good at? Well, how do we give people fluency about what they're good at? Do you do a leadership style? Do you do DISC, or I use Five Voices with teams a lot. It's MBTI based, all those things. Get them to be able to see themselves in the mirror so they have some basic level of fluency of how they can contribute and what makes them unique. One of the other things you can do, Clifton Strengths, through the Gallup tool that's out there. And there's another one it's called Character Strengths. It's a tool that comes from positive psychology. It comes from the VIA Institute on Character. And some people rank high in humor and some do not. And figuring out where you are in that. And if it's high for you, it's high for me. I haven't been the funniest guy today, but I'm not being paid to make people laugh, I don't think, yet today. But getting people to see, like humor is something that's really unique to you. And we need you to use that. We need you to bring that forward appropriately, at the right level, at the right time. Recognize when to suppress your humor at certain moments. But that is one of your gifts. That is one of your strengths. We need you to use that more. Leadership can be one of those character strengths. Prudence can be one of those character strengths. Kindness, gratitude, optimism, hope, those sort of things. And that's all just about getting people to get to know themselves and to really have that. And I think that's actually something that's valuable, especially for younger career professionals, that when they are given an opportunity to lead, they lead based on how they saw other people lead versus leading authentically themselves. Some
Yeah.
people can lead with humor, some people can't. It's going to be a struggle for them. It's just not how they're wired.
It's interesting. I was at a networking event last week and a girl was sitting in the corner and I just went, and she's this cute thing. And she's a cute girl. And I'm just like, how could this person just be sitting in the corner with nobody talking to her? So I said, I want to go talk to her.
Good.
And she quickly said, I am like super anxious and having a really hard time with this.
Oh,
I don't like networking and somehow I was able to break her down a little bit enough to say, like, to let her know, like, hey, I totally resonate with that. Like, networking was really hard for me in the early days of my career. Primarily my sister, who's one of my partners, was always much better at that than I was, but it was a muscle that you kind of had to flex, right? It was something that I learned. It was a muscle that I had to use, and the more I used it, the easier that it got. And so I wonder if that's also true about humor in the workplace, right? You've got to just, you got to play sometimes and appropriately to make sure that, it's working for people, but also, humor sometimes allows you to share those experiences that relate to other people and let them know you've been there.
yeah,
Sometimes we have to tell stories.
yeah.
I'm sure that's a big part of your book, which actually is what I know we're getting close to time here. So I'm curious, if you wouldn't mind telling us just a little bit about what's in this book that you have, the little book of workplace happiness, and, maybe some insights as to what's in there and where we can pick one up.
Sure. Yeah, and to kind of put a period on that conversation about humor, again, be okay with growing the skill if you want to grow the skill, allowing for humor to be present in the workplace, and supporting people that bring that and allowing them to do that, and recognizing the value of that, the bonding and the stress relief and the leadership that comes from those things. There's a lot that comes from it.
Well, and Anthony, if I may, I don't want to interrupt you, but
Oh, no.
also, one thing that we did skip over that I think was super
Oh, yeah.
important. You said, these tests. The DISC assessment was one that I took years
Yeah.
ago. That was super helpful in understanding where people were,
Yeah.
right? And this one didn't necessarily go into that particular, to humor what people were, but you can kind of gather from where people land on there where they're going to be. Like,
Mhm.
analyzers for sure
Yeah.
are probably not going to be cracking jokes. They need the data, right? And so I think I just wanted to mention that because I want the audience to hear what you said about utilizing those tools. They're super important and helpful in getting to know your team,
Mhm.
getting to know your team's strengths, and putting them in a position where their strengths are being used, because that is, I think, like you've mentioned throughout this whole show today, a big part of creating that happiness in the workplace.
Yeah. It, the applicability of this stuff is where it really matters. And that's why taking the assessment and putting it on the shelf and never using it again, helpful. Understanding if you work with a group of 8 to 10, 15 people regularly, really getting some fluency about who they are, how they work, how they operate, how they approach problems, how they think through things, how they strategize. And even collectively, like, where are we all really strong in the room? Where are we collectively weak? Where do we have this massive unit-based blind spot about how
Yeah.
we approach things? And that could be like, we don't have enough people that are thinking about the future. Oh, we don't have enough people to care about impacts of human beings, because that's just not part of the makeup of the small group is really important. That applicability, I think, is really critical.
Well, and like you said, the applicability is important, because if you've got a high driver on the team,
Yeah.
it's nice to be able to warn people about that.
Yeah.
Those high performers can be intense too.
Oh,
And
yeah,
they deserve
absolutely.
a place, but if we understand people,
They can break a lot of eggs in the process of being high performers. And if they get that, if they understand that that's their blind spot, and that their maturation as a leader is to be cognizant of the friction they can cause, and the trust breaking that can come from that, I think it's big. So
yeah.
Sorry, we went on a tangent, which I loved and enjoyed. About the book. The book's available on Amazon. The Little Book of Workplace Happiness. You can find it on there. I think the thing that we've played a lot about around what I would call like the soft edges about workplace culture, and I want to put some emphasis on something that I think is really important, is if trust is the foundation upon which everything else is built, and at the top of that pyramid or that chart, is results. Like, where are we going? KPIs, call it whatever you want at the top there. Accountability is built into that. But if you don't have trust, you don't have people committed to things, then you can't hold people accountable, and you don't get anything done. And you just kind of get stuck in these loops of like no progress. And so that accountability too is where people grow. Some of the best and the hardest moments are intertwined, and they don't feel great at the time because we're being pushed by others to do something that we wouldn't have pushed ourselves to do on our own. And that is leadership in its own way. Sometimes we are self-led and we run forward, and sometimes there's somebody pushing us behind saying, "You got this. Just keep going, keep going, keep going."
Yes.
You're safe. And that can feel really hard in the moment. It can induce anxiety. It's very natural. Called challenge stress or strategic discomfort. But it's critical to growth, and that all of these things that build trust, that build these relationships, that allow us to do these things that can pull out the best version of ourselves and the people around us.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. And thank you for sharing all of this today.
Yeah.
I real quick, last question for you.
Yeah.
If anyone in the audience wants to get a hold of you for a speaking event, or just, maybe this is just something they need some help with, what's the best way for them to do that?
Either way, you can, Raging Narcissist. So my website is my name, anthonypoponi.com. Or you can find me at focusonthe40.com. That's focusonthe40.com. And tons of free resources on there. I want people to have access to things. And the book itself is built around a structure of, it's an interactive book. Get the book, read the part, do the survey, do the instrument, use it with your team, grab the PDF that comes for free with that, and apply these things, because the application is where the magic happens.
Awesome. Thank you, Anthony, for being here today. I really appreciate all of your words, your thoughts, this entire conversation. And thank you for doing what you do.
Yeah, thanks. It's my pleasure. It's my calling. I know that for sure.
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate you. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Chandra.
Well, that show right there is up there with one of my favorite topics, and something that I really enjoy hearing about. I love these strategies. There was so much gold there. Like, just to kind of recap, Anthony's talking about his book, The Little Book of Workplace Happiness, that I hope you all go out and buy and pick up and do the work that he said there. But the tests that are out there to understand your people, and just creating those environments for your team and people where they thrive, they're happy, their goals and their gifts are being utilized in understanding how they can find purpose in the work that they do. Yeah. Thank you so much, Anthony, for being here. Thank you to all who tuned in today, everybody who listened. We really appreciate this live audience. Those of you who participated by posting chats, thank you for being seen today on this show. And we definitely saw you and appreciated that feedback. If you are somebody like Anthony who would like to share your gifts and talents and insights with the attractions industry and business leaders, I'd love to have you as a guest on my show. And you can find that guest survey or guest questionnaire on livewithsondra.com. And our show producer will get in touch with you, our show producer, Maria. If you haven't met her already, she's watching and helping out oftentimes behind the scenes. So I just want to thank her today. As Anthony said, like, we've got to do shout outs for the people who are doing really special things for you. And I certainly can't do this without my team and without my show producer. So without, without leaving you today with what's happening next, keep an eye out for our upcoming guests. We have an amazing lineup next month. I'm super excited. We're going to have the CEO and president of IAPA on the show. I can't wait for that show, and a bunch of amazing guests along the way. So thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for watching. Go out and be great, and we'll see you on the next